Okay, it's Basic Folk. We have honest conversations with folk musicians on the American Songwriter Podcast Network. Hello, I'm Cindy House. If you've never listened to this podcast before, thank you so much and welcome. And if you have, you're great too. Excited about Raye Zaragoza, or if you want to say it in the Spanish way, Raye Zaragoza. Raye has strong spiritual leader vibes, and I literally believe everything that she says. Originally raised in New York City, she and her two siblings and parents, 5 people, somehow all live together in a studio apartment. New York has been a strong influence on her identity and her work ethic. She's a person who's always moving and moving fast. Raye's mom is an immigrant from Japan, and her dad is of Mexican and Native American heritage, which also very much impacts her life in music. Her songs walk the line of activism and poetry, and she manages to make a great pop song with an important message. No matter if she's writing an anthem for protesters at Standing Rock or an old-fashioned love song, centered in her message is fearlessness, bravery, and vulnerability. Her latest album, Woman in Color, was inspired by the current crusade to bring justice and equality to all those who've been marginalized, maligned, and generally shunned at so many different levels. Zaragoza has grown more confident and changed her perspective about adding her voice to that narrative. She writes songs about loving yourself no matter what you look like that reaches out to anyone that feels different. Even a song like The It Girl resonates with people who do not identify as female. All this to say, Raye is also a great hang. Oh man, she is fun, quick-witted, and like all cool people, she has her own podcast, Create Well, with her co-host Erica Ilan. Enjoy Raye, she is the real deal. We're going to take a listen to a song from her latest album, Woman in Color, and I did mention The It Girl, but I wanted to play this really beautiful song called Red that we do talk about later in the interview. It's a song that talks about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across North America, and it just is a stunning song. Okay, here is Red from Raye Zaragoza, and then we'll get to our conversation on Basic Folk.
Don't go out in the rain, don't go out in the night. It happens every day, they just vanish from sight. Don't go walking alone, speak to who you don't know. They've been finding your sisters in the Red River, in the Red River, in the red, in the red, in the red, in the red.
I'm learning Spanish, so I feel like a little shy about my pronunciation.
It's fine. It's Zaragoza.
Zaragoza.
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
I read your interview with Lizzie No in the Talk House, and it was so great. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we got into it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I don't have
Thank
any
you.
questions about that particularly, but if anybody's listening to this and hasn't read that, definitely look for that. Cool. So
out.
let's get into it.
Awesome.
You grew up in New York, and you lived there until you were 14, moved to LA, and then it's kind of like we went back and forth between New York and LA for a long time. But how do you see being raised in New York City, particularly like during those formative years, impacting your personality?
Oh yeah, I think that growing up in New York is exactly why I am the way I am, for better or for worse. In New York, like city kids, we grow up really quickly. You know, we are on our own at a very young age. I was like taking the subways by myself at the age of like 10, 11. And you kind of like figure out who you are very young. And I've always been kind of like a go-getter, like entrepreneur, like to have control over my life and like super like hyperactive in that way. And I think that a lot of that stems from growing up in a big city where like the world is at your fingertips and so you can just go get it. And I remember like once I was like 8 years old and I really wanted this boombox like purse. And I saved up my money from like lunch money my mom gave me. And then I just like walked out the door and went and bought the purse. So like I felt like I was like an adult, like I could just have agency and figure out what I wanted to do, what I wanted to attain, do it. And I didn't really have to tell anyone about it. I just could do it at like the age of 8. And so I think that that really taught me this like control of like I can manifest whatever I want out of my creative career, out of my music or out of whatever. But it also, I think that when I hear about people's childhoods of like running around in a backyard and like having animals and experiencing nature and all of these things like that are so innocent and beautiful, like I didn't have any of that. And I think I'm discovering a lot of it as an adult. And so I think growing up fast is like both like a really amazing thing and also like kind of a not a great thing.
Yeah. Sounds like hitting it big before you're like ready to, before you've actually like grown up.
Yeah, and I grew up with a lot of child actors. I was an actor when I was a kid, but I grew up with a lot of my friends when I was going to the professional performing arts school from the age of 11 to 13 in middle school. Most of my friends were working actors at the age of 11. They were on Broadway or they were doing this or whatever. And I worked from time to time too. And so it was just this real mentality that like at the age of 13, like if you're not like making a name for yourself at that age, then you're like behind. And that's a really kind of, I look at 13-year-olds and I'm like, oh my gosh, just enjoy your childhood. Don't worry about like making it big.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Funny.
Oh my. Okay, so you also lived in a studio apartment. Is that correct? Like as a family of 5?
Yeah. Family of 5. And I live in a studio now and I look around and I'm like, oh, this place is so small, but it's actually the same size of the like studio I grew up in.
Wow.
And yeah, I was like brother, sister, mom, dad, 400 square feet. Yeah, until I was 10. We did that until I was 10. And yeah.
How did you find privacy or find alone time as a kid, and how do you relate to that now?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I honestly, part of me thinks I'm like supposed to be an introvert. Like I was like born to be an introvert, but I never really became an introvert because there was nowhere to introvert in my family's home. I didn't really have anywhere to go to be alone. Ever. I'm trying to think of a time when I felt, if I was alone, it was when I was walking, and I was walking to school, and I had music in my ears. So like alone to me was like music. Like music was my escape from constantly, having people, and I grew up in an environment that wasn't incredibly like there was, that studio apartment was not like the most incredible place for a lot of my childhood. My parents, when you have like 2 parents that like live in the same room as you who argue all the time, like there's nowhere to go, And so the dynamic of that apartment and that my childhood oftentimes was not great. And so I think that, and oftentimes it was amazing, and I love my parents and they did an amazing job raising us. But, I think that when you're like so young and you're in those formative years and you don't have a place to go, you don't have a place to escape. For me, that always was music and walking.
Yeah, talking about music being an escape and first listening to music as a young person, being introduced to different types of music like folk music, the mariachi music that your dad would play for you, classic rock. You would find these through, family, friends, crushes, making you mixtapes.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those first connections to music and what it felt like to discover new music and develop your own taste?
Yeah. Music was like everything to me when I was a kid. Between, my dad was a mariachi and
he played.
Yeah. My dad played in a mariachi band. He plays trumpet. And I've always, like, coming from a Mexican heritage on my dad's side, my dad's Mexican and also Native American, and music is such a part of Mexican heritage and Native American culture. But the mariachi music was a huge part of my life. I loved it so much. My abuelita was always playing it. She was always playing Selena, and I loved Selena. I didn't understand the Spanish songs, but I still loved it. And I just loved the feeling of like mariachi music and how it like surrounded you. Like there were so many people and it was like this communal thing. And then, for me when I was younger, I loved Jewel and Avril Lavigne and like girl power rock. And then, in middle school, I got into Queen and Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. And yeah, I don't know. It's just like music has always been like a god to me. Music has always been like the ultimate for me. It has been my escape. It has been my enjoyment. It has been, it's been everything. And so I think every single piece of that shaped my music. And also I grew up doing musical theater in New York. And I know that musical theater super like shaped my storytelling, in folk music.
In talking about being a child actor, doing musical theater in New York, it was very competitive. And you say that you were raised to be competitive, and hearing you talk about New York, it just seems like it was ingrained in you early on. How do you relate to being competitive as an adult?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually talked about that a little bit on my podcast as well. And competition is so interesting because I definitely have always seen myself as a competitive individual. I grew up doing competitive gymnastics where they teach you so young to be competitive. And then with acting, I couldn't even continue acting because the competition of it to me was so stressful. It was so like debilitatingly stressful because you're put up against other people, many of which or you care about, and only one person gets the gig. That terrifies me. Yeah. It sounds so stressful.
As somebody who like cares about other people.
Yeah, I just like, it just was so hard for me. I feel like with music, when I found music, to me, there is no competition in music, from my perspective, because instead of with acting, I felt like I was auditioning for a part and then one person got the role. But with music, you are creating your own role and you are creating your own space, and I think I've been in like two situations in music. Like one time I was a finalist for the No Depression like songwriting award at Fresh Grass Festival. And we all had to perform, and then, someone won. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. This feels like an acting situation where it's a competition. But even then, like, we all loved each other so much and we didn't care who won. And so with music, for me, I'm always in constant competition with myself and always trying to one up myself at all times. But I never, like, really rarely feel in competition with other artists at all. Because I really feel like we're all creating our own roles, and then we get to like create our own space for that role. But yeah, I'm definitely a naturally competitive person.
You also experienced jealousy as a child actor, and you also talked about this on your podcast, Create Well.
Yeah.
Jealousy as a compass, which I thought was like so interesting. And you said you're comparing your insides to someone's outsides. So now when you realize that you're jealous of someone, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, so I was like, definitely want to talk about this.
Yeah.
When you realize that you're jealous of somebody, you actually like lean into that feeling and try to figure out why and figure out like something about yourself, like learn something about yourself. What has that journey with jealousy been like? And like, what does that leaning in feel like for you?
That's a great question. And also, I'm so happy that you've listened to my podcast and read so many things about me. That's like so cool. But yeah, like jealousy as this compass is this, this thing that Erica and I really thought about. And I really do believe when you're jealous of someone, it should be kind of like this exciting thing. Because you're like, oh, like, what do they have that I want? And how can I incorporate that into my own life? And I think I mentioned this on the podcast or in another situation. I can't remember when, but I was starting to feel really deep jealousy towards people in relationships. And I had never felt that before in a long time because I was so focused on my career. And I was like, I will focus on my career. Like, I don't want any relationship. I got out of a really long, serious relationship like 3 years ago. I don't want any part of that. And then the past year, I started getting jealous of people in relationships. And I was like, what's going on with me? What's going on with me? I'm like, oh gosh, like jealousy is a compass. Like maybe there's like a part of me that like wants that in my life. And maybe I should unpack that and see why and start like coming to terms with that in my own heart. And then once I do, the jealousy just turns into like this excitement for like what's to come. And so, that was happening the past year. And also it's like, I think as a musician, sometimes I'll get jealous of people who are doing things that are like, sometimes I'll still get jealous of people who are acting because it was a part of my past and I do kind of miss it in a way. And I spent so much time getting away from it. And so I'm like, like how can I incorporate that in my life? Even just like in a little bit, in a little like tangible way. But I know that the leaning into it can oftentimes be really painful because you have to like come to this humbleness of being like, oh, like this is, because I think a lot of times we fight jealousy with like, we want to just fight it with ego, and be like, this is why I'm better than that person. This is why I deserve what they have. This is why this of like trying to be in competition with that person when really we should just be like taking a step back and looking at them and saying like, what can I learn from you? And that's why I always, on the podcast I mentioned, I always suggest to people that if you're like debilitatingly jealous of someone, which I have felt, where you literally become like obsessed, like you just think about it all the time and you're like, you can't function or be in a room with that person because you're just so jealous of them. Just like stare fear in the eye, go up to them or message them and be like, hey, I really admire what you're doing and I would love to like get a coffee or jump on a Zoom or talk on the phone because I'd love to learn from you. And oftentimes like those messages won't be responded to, but like sometimes they will be. But even just the act of doing that is so healing.
I want to like follow you around. So if you're going to start a cult or anything, like I will join.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's the best thing I've ever heard.
Part of your story growing up is that you felt in order to be beautiful, you had to be white. And there's some really like heartbreaking stories of you trying to make your skin lighter and getting embarrassed when you'd get really tan and you wanted to be a pretty white girl more than anything. Yeah. So now as an adult, you have been writing songs and telling stories that kind of like dispute your old feelings. Yeah. Could you talk about that process? What was that process like for you in discovering your self-worth?
Yeah, it's in real time. I'm still like deep in that recovery process. I grew up even in New York City, which is an incredibly diverse city. I grew up in predominantly white communities. And I watched a lot of television and movies and Disney Channel and whatever growing up. And I just like wanted so bad to be like the girl who gets the guy or like the pretty one who like everyone, admires or like the leading girl on the TV show or the this or that, especially growing up as an actor. And I remember as a kid, as a child actor, they always said to us, well, you're a minority. You're always going to be the best friend. Like that was said over and over and over. You will get cast as the best friend. You're not going to be the lead. You're going to be the best friend. You're going to be the sidekick. And how does that mess with you as a kid, being told that you will always be the sidekick? And that's why in the It Girl, my song, I say like, do you ever feel like everywhere you go, you're just an act in the sideshow, just a friend, a second thought, And that's how it felt. And that was constantly being ingrained in my head as a child, especially as a child actor going out for roles, never being auditioning for a lead role, always auditioning for a sidekick or a best friend. And I I always thought that if I just was white, all of my problems would go away and people would think I was pretty, and that I'd be accepted, and that maybe the boys in the class would like me, and whatever. And no matter how delusional that was, it felt very real. And I know that there's so much truth to it, and that it is a ongoing societal issue that I hope is getting better slowly as we have more representation in media and more representation in the entertainment industry, and we have these conversations like we're having right now. And so that shift for me is ongoing, like I said. I even know, like, in my first relationship, I had this debilitating fear that my boyfriend at the time, who happened to be white, but he was going to leave me for a white girl because I will never be as good as a white girl. That was what my head said to me. And I'm so sad that that's how I felt, but it was how I felt. And I know that I'm not alone in feeling that way, because, like we're told over and over, you will always be the best friend. You will always be the sidekick. And I was talking to a group of students at a college a couple weeks ago, and she said that she feels the same way, and like, what does she do about it? And I told her, instead of trying to tell yourself that you are the leading role or you are this thing that we've always wanted to be, I have embraced this sense of like rebelliousness, and how like whoever chooses to love me, or, you know, embracing who I am fully is like a form of activism. It is a form of like radical reclamation. It's a form of rebelliousness, because society for my life has told me not to feel that way. So how fun is that to like love yourself in a way that is rebellious, that is radical, that is a form of activism, that is a form of reclamation. And she liked that too. I just feel like loving myself is a small way of changing the world, because hopefully young girls that look like me will not feel that way in the next generation.
So like in our cult, are we going to wear those silk scarves or like robes or something?
Yes. We are going to wear, like, I don't even know. It's going to be great. We're going to wear hats and holiday sweaters.
The wide-brimmed hats.
Yes, the wide-brimmed hats.
I was making like notes about this interview and had like pages and pages and pages of notes, and the last word I wrote was hats. I didn't actually like end up writing a question, but
oh my gosh, I love, like, I don't think anyone has ever prepared to like speak to me as much as you have. This is so wonderful.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I want to talk about your feelings about performing. You wanted to be a performer since you were really young, and then realized what music was what you wanted to perform when you were like a teenager. Yeah. Can you talk about what it feels like when you perform?
Oh, I'm going to cry. I miss it so much. I miss performing so much. Performing will always be like my first love. I've been performing on stage since I was 5 years old, possibly. Maybe, I think my first school play was when I was 8, but I was doing all kinds of stuff on stage before that. For me, I always say this and it sounds crazy, but I feel more myself on stage than I do not on stage. I feel like I am more comfortable on stage than I do in an interview, or I do like in real life. Sometimes I feel like I'm always in my head a lot, or I get kind of anxious, or I can have social anxiety or whatever. I'm always second guessing myself. But when I'm on stage, like everything clicks and I'm fine. And I just feel very poised and graceful and myself. And I love the stage so much. And I miss it very dearly.
Oh, man. Yeah, I bet. How do you think your zeal for performing and all your experiences performing as a young person have shaped your writing and your music?
Yeah, you know, even when I write songs, I a lot of times when I write songs, I think about the performance aspect of the song, and I will write songs that I want to perform live, you know, and I think about like the live performance aspect when I'm writing. And I think that growing up in musical theater really shaped my songwriting, because musical theater is so much about storytelling. And I feel like for me, folk songwriting is my way of storytelling. And I take a lot of inspiration from kind of like the structure of writing a musical theater song for writing my songs as well. There's always like a beginning, middle, and an end, and like a thesis statement of the song. And it's really, I'd like to think that my record is in like, it's got like a little bit of like a touch of like theatricalness to it. Yeah, one day I'll write my musical.
That would be great. You'd write a great musical.
Oh, I can't wait.
I read about the first time you bombed on stage when you were in the 3rd grade.
Yes.
Hilarious. It was during a chorus line and you were sick and you could like barely get through the song. And then afterwards, what did you walk up to your friend and you're like, how was it? And she was like, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
How do you think that experience helped you overcome embarrassment? And then how do you think that outlook kind of translates for you beyond music?
Yeah, that experience shaped me in so many ways, and I'm very grateful for it. The worst happened very early. I mean, I'm not gonna say the worst, like, oh my gosh, there's tons of things that can happen, but yeah, I was in one of my first talent shows at school, and the whole school was there, and all my parents were there, and all their friends, and it was huge. And I was tap dancing and singing, and I had like bronchitis or something as an 8-year-old. I could not talk. I was like, just completely, my voice is gone, and I was gargling salt water backstage, and my parents, you know, they're like their own version of like stage parents, and they were like, you're fine, get on stage, just go, you're good. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just couldn't get any of the song out. And so it was just like muffled sounds and then tap dancing, and then like muffled sounds and then tap dancing. And yeah, I went off stage and I went up to my friend and I was like, how'd it go? And she was like, not good. And then I asked my mom, I was like, how'd it go? And she was like, it went the way it went. It just
No.
and I like wasn't even upset. I was just like, like, great. You know, like, I survived. And I think a lot of times with stage fright, we get so afraid of what could happen. But I've performed so ill. You know, I performed at the Troubadour with like vertigo, and they had to leave a garbage off stage for me to puke. Like, I've performed like at where else? I've performed in DC with bronchitis, and I had to transpose all of my songs down 2 keys so I could actually just get them out. Which is crazy, because anytime anyone like messages me like, I found your music at that show at the DC show, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm hilarious. Like, and I actually made like a lot of new fans at that show. I don't know why. Maybe they thought it was endearing how I was like, hey everyone, I'm like really sick right now. But it was great, and I never have any doubt in myself that I can make it through. And I think it started with that 8-year-old just making it happen, and like, what's the worst that can happen? You know, you walk off stage, it's done. So yeah.
And then does that translate into your non-music life?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part. Let's see. Let me think. I think so. I think I feel like a little bit more shameless on stage than I do in real life. I think I'm a lot more afraid of making a mistake in real life than I am making a mistake on stage. Like, I could stop a song and forget all of my lyrics and be like, oh, I'm sorry, you guys, let me start that over, and walk off stage and have no anxiety about it. But if I make a mistake in real life, like I forget to do anything, or I don't know, forget someone's birthday, or forget to bring something to my mom that she's waiting for me to do, or forget anything like that, I feel so awful, and I have so much shame around it. And I guess maybe it's because real life to me feels like more serious than like a stage performance. I'm like, well, like what's going to happen? Who's like, you know, what's on the line? And so I think that maybe it doesn't translate to my actual life, and I should maybe work on that.
Kind of sounds like your on stage self is like your alter ego that can just like do whatever. You should give her a name.
I know. I do feel that way. It's kind of like, you know, Hannah Montana. She has like her two versions of herself. I feel like all artists must feel a certain level of that, and I get to funnel a lot of the parts of myself that I want to amplify and that feel like my most empowered and my most confident and my most creative and my most brave. I get to channel that all into my music and all onto the stage, which is all a part of me, but it's all like amplified when I'm on stage. And then when I'm off stage, sometimes those things are not as in focus as I would like them to be.
This kind of relates. On your podcast, you were talking about how you feel like a vehicle for your songs and that your ancestors are speaking through you with the writing, and that it's humbling to think of like the generations that worked hard for you to be here. Could you talk about how you like first felt that connection with your ancestors through writing, and then how do you work to keep that connection?
Absolutely. I love this question. I think that the first time I really felt it was when I wrote In the River, the song about Standing Rock that kind of launched my career into what it is now of writing songs of a social justice nature. That was kind of the first one I wrote that got a lot of attention, and I felt had some impact. And when I wrote that song and people came up to me afterwards saying like, that's so amazing, like you wrote this song, like how did you do it? I would blank every time, and a part of me really, really believed I didn't write the song. And I kept having to tell myself, I was like, no, like I was sitting on my bed by myself. No one else was there. I wrote that song. But sometimes I look at the lyrics and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this feels like it was written by my grandma Via. It was written by my Aunt Jo. It was written by my abuelita. It was written by my obachan. It was written by all of these people who came before me that were speaking through me. And I really feel that about that song. I feel that I am not responsible for the impact that it's had. I feel that it is like because of like a huge team of energy and people and spirits. And so that's how I feel. That's how it felt with that song. And now whenever I write, I always like do a little prayer to my ancestors, like allow them to come in and let them know that if they have anything to say, that I'm here to say it for them. And I think that that is the way I want to always lead my career, because as a singer-songwriter or performer, it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in like, this is like so in my control, and these songs are like come from me, and I'm like a finite being of like stories. And it's like, no, it's like I'm here to share the stories of like what's like present, past, and future. And I just want to be like a humble like servant of those stories. And I remember hearing a songwriter speak at the ASCAP Expo about how she feels that she's a television set, and that she gets her songs like from her through the antennas. And like, if you wouldn't go up to a television set and say, oh, like that episode of Friends was great, congratulations, you know, like that comes from like something far beyond. And so I loved that. I'm like, oh yeah, like I feel that music for me is a spiritual experience, and I just want to channel all of it through me. But I'd never feel solely responsible for my creations. I feel like all the women who like, and men and everyone who created me, whether it's my mom, my dad, my ancestors, whatnot, like they're a part of that too.
Okay, so let's talk about, you were 22 years old when you wrote In the River, and then your debut album, Fight for You. In the River is also on that album. Let's just say it's multifaceted. There are protest songs. There are songs about finding your voice as a woman of color, and there are good old-fashioned love songs.
Woo-hoo!
Let's just put that out there. So something I read about this record is that you had been smothering your natural identity to please homogenous pop culture. Mm-hmm. Boo. Mm-hmm. Don't like it.
Boo, boo.
But after Fight for You, you discovered the beauty, significance, and necessity of your identity for the broader conversation. So can you talk about how life felt before writing that record versus after?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that before writing that record, I thought about what does the world want to hear from me as a woman in music, and how am I going to make it as a 21-year-old writing songs. And I was like, okay, I'll write love songs. I'll write things that are nice and pretty and people will enjoy them, and it won't make any noise, won't upset anyone, you know? And that's what I did for like the first 5 years of trying to pursue a music career, from like the age of like, maybe not 5 years, like 3 years, like from the age of like 19 to 22. And I just tried so hard to like give the people what I thought they wanted. And it was so not fulfilling for me. And I wanted to stop writing songs because I just felt like I had nothing interesting to say. And my boy problems were not interesting to me at all. And then I wrote In the River and everything changed. And I realized, oh, all of the dark feelings I have, all of the things that I never want to share because I think people are going to think that I'm being too political, or that I need to like, you know, behave and be societal, likely, you know, just be nice and quiet like a woman should be or whatever. That's like, that person is not going to create the art that is going to keep me dedicated to my music and is going to keep me inspired. So that's when it all changed.
The new album, Woman in Color, was inspired by the current crusade to bring justice and equality to all those who have been marginalized, maligned, and generally shunned at so many different levels. So can you talk about like how between your debut album and this record, how you grew more confident or changed your perspective about adding your voice to this narrative?
Yeah. You know, I think that this has been like a really crucial change for me between Fight for You and Woman in Color, because I was suffering from some like really crazy imposter syndrome for a lot of that time. And imposter syndrome, for anyone listening who doesn't know, it's like this feeling like you're an imposter or like your voice,
like you don't belong.
Like you don't belong. And I've always been really navigating my identity through my music career. A lot of, you know, I'm indigenous on my father's side. I'm also Mexican, which is redundant. Like that's all like indigenous. And on my mom's side, I'm an immigrant. My mom's an immigrant from Japan, and she's also Taiwanese. And so I've always broadcast myself as Asian American, as Native American, as Latinx. And, you know, people look at me and they're like, you're not Asian. And I'm like, yes, I am. And then, you know, a lot of times I've been labeled as an indigenous artist in a lot of situations because people read my bio and they pull that part out of it, and have labeled me. I've been called Native Americana, or I've been called these things. And I'm a multiracial girl from New York City, and being labeled as a Latinx artist or an indigenous artist or an Asian American artist, to me, made me feel really like it was an identity crisis, because I felt like I wasn't enough of any of these things to claim them. And being labeled by my race in my music was so uncomfortable, because I create folk music that historically has never included a lot of these races. And so I just felt this like, what does this all mean? And how do I make sense of this? And how do I talk about it? And I'm a part of a genre that I'm very much a minority in. And I'm a part of different cultural communities that I embrace so much and I love so much, but yet I also feel like I grew up very much disenfranchised from. And as an adult, I've had to work my way back of educating myself on what it truly means to be an Indigenous woman, what it truly means to be the daughter of an immigrant. And I suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome of like, how do I present myself? Who am I as an artist when I can't really fit how I feel? I want to present myself in a headline, you know, and every headline that has ever been written about me, labeling me by my race, has always felt like this punch in the gut. Like, oh my gosh, like, is that even me? You know? And so I think the years between Fight for You and Woman in Color was a lot of this grappling.
This is crazy that you are like, I don't belong. Like, it's one of those things where you're like, I don't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I don't belong in the homogenous white world, and I don't belong in this other world that I clearly am part of.
Yes, it's exactly how it feels. And that's like this narrative that I'm really trying to talk about when it comes to mixed race individuals in America, because we're not white enough to be one of the white kids, obviously. And we've always felt like we're not white enough to be American, but we're not like, you know, like I'm not Mexican enough. I don't speak Spanish enough to really to claim Mexican. And I'm not Native enough to be Native. And I'm not Asian enough to be Asian. And it's this feeling of like, who am I? Like, I literally feel like I belong nowhere. And that has been the most alienating feeling of my life. And so I think that monologue I gave right there is what I've been grappling with in between these two records, and what I've been trying to come to terms with this new record, and what I feel like such a sense of catharsis having released this album, because so much of it is about that identity crisis. And now that I'm like talking about it, it feels like it's healing.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Because it's like you're telling me, and my reaction is like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds really hard and insane.
Yeah.
Another thing you were talking about on your podcast is how you were being interviewed by a white guy, and he said the It Girl really resonated with him, which you saw as like a song for brown girls. And you also said your brother really loves the song. And I just want to know a little bit more about how you feel about a song like that impacting people beyond maybe who you expected.
Yeah, I love it. Like I said on the podcast, like the fact that a white guy was like, I identify with that song, to me was like so cool, because it shows we've been told for generations, hundreds of years, that telling brown stories or telling black stories or telling the stories of marginalized racial groups can only be done in certain times, because it's just not relatable to the like broad America, you know. And like, oh, we can't have black leading ladies or brown leading ladies because then like the majority of America won't feel seen through it, you know. And that comment he said like proves all of that wrong. It really shows that we can tell stories from like the brown girl perspective, and it can relate to anyone, and that we are more alike than we think, and that we don't have to hear the same story over and over again for it to relate to each other. Like, we can tell diverse stories and find the bridges, and that is what's going to actually make us realize that we all like every single person, like brown, black, white, Asian, like we all come from very common truths, and there is something that is in all of our hearts that that can connect, and that can, like, even when we talk about issues that don't specifically relate to us, it can really change our lives, and it can really make us feel seen. And so that's like my greatest, it's one of my like favorite things to happen, is when people of different walks of life can say that they relate to what I'm saying, because it just goes to show how universal and relatable these themes are.
I've thought a lot about this question, but the way that I wrote it is like very simple, and I don't know if it makes sense. Like, I like the way that you balance the activism in your music with kind of like the whimsical, listenable, like swayable nature.
Yeah.
You know, in the music. Can you talk about that balance,
Yes.
like where that might come from?
Sure. I'm a big fan of like juxtaposition, and I've always kind of joked that I'm like trying to hypnotize people into making change or taking action or being activists, you know?
Cult
It's
leader.
like, yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. So, it's kind of like, listen to this pretty song with this pretty voice, and like, I'll put a pretty dress on, but I'm going to tell you that we need to change the world. And it's kind of just like, I'm like a compulsively positive person. I am like super cheesy and super smiley, and like that's who I'll always be. But I'm also incredibly outspoken, and I will never shy away from, speaking up for what's right. And so, I used to play at rallies all the time, and there would be multiple speakers like dropping these incredibly empowering truth bombs of speeches that were like amazing. And everyone's like, yeah, 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 yeah. And then I would get on stage and just like give a bit of an exhale for the whole audience, because I just am going to play like a pretty song with the same intentions of all of the speeches that moved everyone incredibly. But just, it's a song, and it's like this exhale. And so I've always thought about how with my music, I want to be this like exhale at a rally. I want to be the piece within the movement, and I never write anything about, like, I don't like, peace and love is great, but also like, I like action. I like moving forward. I like speaking up. And I've always felt like, yeah, I want to have my songs be that exhale at a rally. So it's about the action, but it's also a bit of an exhale. And I remember one time a friend of mine, it was so crazy. I was performing at this event in Albuquerque, and I forgot my wallet at like a Starbucks or something. And this, one of the girls who was working at the event, she drove me, and she was like in the car. She's like, oh, she's like, I didn't want to tell you, but I wanted to share something about what your song did for me. And she spent a lot of time at Standing Rock, like far, 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 far longer than I did, working at the medical tent. And she told me that before they went to the front lines, they would listen to my song in their teepee to remind themselves to keep peaceful and to keep level-headed when they were at the front line. And that changed everything for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like there is a place for ballads in the movement.
Wow. That's amazing.
Thanks.
On the new record, you work with producer Tucker Martine, who has worked with people like Laura Veers, Decemberists, My Morning Jacket. And you mentioned his work with Blind Pilot as a reason to work with him, who like Blind Pilot, when I was going through a really, really dark time, like their music is just so emotionally resonant. And I find Tucker's work to be very emotional, and your music is very emotional. So how did Tucker's understanding of emotional music add to this record?
Oh my gosh. It made the record. I mean, Tucker is this like sonic wizard, and he feels emotion in every single like intricate piece of a song. And he took my like emotional sketches of these stories and was able to fill them in and bring them to life in a way that I could have only dreamt of. And I mean, I was such a big fan of Tucker's. I shared this story about how I was driving down Venice Boulevard and Don't Doubt by Blind Pilot came on, and I had to park my car and cry. And I said to myself, like out loud that day, I was like, whoever produced this song is going to produce my music one day. And I didn't even seek him out in that moment. It was like years later when my manager asked me, like, who do you want to produce the record? And I was like, that guy.
Obviously.
And it's just this emotional quality that jumps out of the song, even on the radio or on a vinyl or a CD or anything. It just jumps out, and it's just like this Tucker stamp. And it's breathtaking. I'm just like, I count my lucky stars that he agreed to do my record.
I really, it's hard to pick a favorite on the record. but I think mine is the song Red. And you wrote it about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across North America, and wanting to start these conversations in America about the movement for protection for these women and girls and female identifying people. When you encounter an opportunity to talk about this epidemic, because again, like Red is such a beautiful song, and I'm like, oh, swaying to it, and then I hear the lyrics and I'm like, oh shit, this is about murdered Indigenous women. When you encounter the opportunity to talk about it, what does the responsibility feel like, and like where is the balance for you in terms of education versus like frustration for the lack of knowledge?
Absolutely. I think that finding that place can be difficult, and I think Lizzie and I have talked about that a little bit in terms of like, as artists, it's our job to start conversations. Always, it's our job to start conversations, and writing a song about something is a way of starting a conversation, just as we are now. Like the fact that you asked about this song is an amazing opportunity for me to talk about the issue, and I think that is a huge reason why I wrote the song, is because I wanted to have the conversations following the record. And I am also still learning about missing and murdered Indigenous women and the legislation that is in the works and has failed Indigenous women historically, and how there's so much more to learn and to do, and how there's no real databases for who's missing, and how there's just
it's even kind of hard to find information about it.
It's even hard to find information about. And so one resource I will share is sovereignbodies.org. They are starting their own database, and they have some resources there. And if you research MMIW, I know Rising Hearts is doing work with MMIW, and that's a good place to start. But basically, it's something that no one has talked about because, Indigenous women, Native women have a higher rate of murder and violence than any other like race of women in the country. But because of like the ways that these women have gone missing, like off of reservations and whatnot, a lot of it is not tracked. And it's just completely devastating. And I very much urge everyone to continue to educate yourself on the matter. And if it's new to you, to start educating yourself on it, because it's something that has been going on forever and very much not talked about.
Have you heard of the artist Beatrice Deer?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
She's an Inuit artist who lives in Montreal. And I interviewed her for the podcast, and I don't think she had written a song about the epidemic, but I think she like participated in, cause she also like she's amazing. She like makes her own clothes out of like seal skin. And so she made an indigenous Inuit, coat that women wear that they can carry their baby in, and and it was amazing. Red for like an art installation. Yeah, she's really cool.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's how I first heard about it.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's like, as artists, she's starting the conversation, and it's like we just have to continue.
Yeah, and it's like it's such an awful thing. I don't mean to like sidetrack us, but it's such an awful thing that like, it's kind of like when I was first reading about the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like you're walking into the middle of the conversation where people's lives have been decimated by this thing that you're just like, oh, I have no idea about this. Like,
yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because I had the same realization about the opioid epidemic when I saw a documentary like 5 years ago. And I was like, I didn't know this was like one of the leading causes of like death. It was just insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Right before the pandemic, you moved to Long Beach, which is, you're in the LBC right now.
Oh, yeah.
You had been on the road for like years before everything shut down and everything stopped. So since being off the road, you've experienced, it sounds like, some incredible growth and learn to value yourself as an artist and as a whole human being. Yes.
Woo woo.
Not just a person on stage. So as someone who held your identity in like being a touring artist and equating your self-worth with how big the shows were, can you expand on how you're measuring your self-worth now, and how will performing be different for you in the future? So like a very simple, light question.
Yeah. It's a great question. You know, I feel a lot more like emotionally, mentally healthy now, which is interesting because we live in a pandemic. But I think that this one silver lining for me was like this exhale of getting off the road. And yeah, there was this 3-year period of like just going from tour to tour to tour to tour to tour, not taking care of myself. I was getting chronic headaches. I was like kind of hurting for a lot of the end of it, and just overworking myself and running myself to the ground and not caring, because I kept telling myself like if I pass on a tour, then like I will not, then I'm like, who am I? Like I'm a touring artist. If I say no to something, then I'm like a failure. And now I've realized that there is no way to measure my self-worth. My self-worth is a given. I am, you know, as long as I wake up in the morning, I am worthy of my day, and that everything I do is creativity, whether it's like washing the dishes or cleaning my house or writing a song, like everything is creativity. And
Washing the dishes
is absolutely creativity.
I guess that's true. Got to get those grime and grease stains off somehow.
Everyone washes the dishes differently. It's a form of like creative, you know, innovation.
Wow. Never thought about that.
And, you know, everything is creativity, and I'm worthy no matter what. That has been like kind of this radical feeling of like, I don't need to earn my self-respect. Like it is a given. And it's really set me free to do things that I've always wanted to do, and to think of myself as like a full creative. Like I'm starting to learn how to cook and roller skate. I started a podcast. I'm starting to write essays. I'm starting to write a book, or thinking about writing a musical, and think about all of these things that I never would have thought about on the road. Because if I was on tour, I would be like, I am a touring artist. I make music. I play shows, and that's it. And if I do anything else, it's going to take away from that. And I now know that that's not true. And so, yeah.
Rad. I love that. Okay, Raye.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, let us do the lightning round.
Ooh, love lightning rounds.
Okay. Nobody ever says that. Everyone's like, oh, I hate these, or I'm no good at these, but I love your attitude going in. All right, first song you learned on the guitar.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Wow, that is a challenge.
I know. It took a long time.
What is your karaoke song?
Don't Stop Believing.
I already know the answer to this because you have a special person in your life named Bronx. Dogs or cats or something else?
Oh, dogs. Always dogs.
What kind of dog is Bronx?
Bronx is a Shih Tzu Pekingese Ewok. If you see a picture of Bronx, you'll know what I'm talking about.
What is your coffee order?
I don't drink coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, no caffeine at all. Not even.
All right.
Yeah, 0 caffeine.
It's great. First celebrity crush.
Adam Pascal. I can't even say he's a celebrity. Adam Pascal is like. Anyway, I was obsessed with Rent as a kid, and I used to have Adam Pascal like as Roger, like all over every binder, everything. And so, to call him a celebrity might be a stretch, but Adam Pascal.
Some musical theater listeners.
Musical theaters.
They enjoy that. Who is the nicest musician you've ever met?
The nicest musician I've ever met, Rodriguez.
First album you bought with your own money?
Avril Lavigne, Let Go.
Yes. What was your first concert?
American Idol.
Wow.
My sister made me go.
Oh, well, that's not fair.
With Clay Aiken, yeah. It wouldn't have been my choice.
What was the first concert that would have been your choice?
The first concert that would have been my choice. Oh my gosh, what was the first concert that would have been my choice? I think me and my friend Kalina went and saw Cartel at the Roxy. I don't know if it would have been my choice, but it was like kind of a really fun experience.
What is the last book you read?
The last book I read, Mindy Kaling's book, Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me? I think that's, yeah.
Flying or invisibility?
Oh, flying.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
I haven't seen either.
Wow. Okay. That's fair.
To be
That's
honest.
Fair. Okay, here's the last one. Where's the most beautiful place you've ever visited?
Cinque Terre, Italy. That was amazing.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, I want to go back.
That's it. We have done the lightning round.
Yay!
We have finished the interview. Thank you so much for talking to me. This was like a real pleasure.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. This was amazing. I'm just so impressed that you listened to my podcast and everything. That was so cool.
I listened to a couple episodes. I want to listen to the KT Tunstall episode.
Yes, you should. She's so
amazing.
Fun.
Yeah.
She's so fun.
Love her. And love you. I love the record. And
Thank you.
You're just honestly just keep me in mind if you are starting if you're starting a community. Let's not say cult, because cult has bad connotations, but
totally. I will let you know about the
yes. Put me on that mailing list.
Yay. Well, thank you so much.
Very happy to say Basic Folk this week was produced by Eric Norwood. Thanks, Eric. Lindsay Myers is our business manager. Basic Folk is on the American Songwriter Podcast Network. Alex Stanton of Townspeople does our music. I'm Cindy Howes, and if you like this interview, please share it with a friend or an enemy or a family member or someone you're not related to. Anyone, really, if you think they would enjoy it. And please rate, subscribe, and review on iTunes. That's very helpful. You can listen to all of the episodes of Basic Folk wherever you get podcasts and at my website, cindyhouse.net. And thanks for listening all the way to the end. So great. Okay, bye.